The cup was still warm when they told me to pack a few things. Just for a little while, Mom, Daniel said. Only until the lease ends. You'll be back before spring. I nodded. Because nodding was easier than asking why the guest room in their house already had new sheets. Why my keys were already off the hook by the back door. He smiled like it was a kindness. And maybe he thought it was. I took 3 sweaters. Left the yellow one. It smelled too much like Harold. The house didn't say goodbye. But I could feel it watching as I closed the door behind me without locking it. In Daniel's car, I kept my hands folded. No one said much. The road out of town looked smaller than it ever had. That night, I slept in a bed that didn't creak in the right places. The sheets were too smooth. The lamp too new. The silence too tight. No radio hum. No old wood smell. Just lemon-scented detergent and the echo of someone else's comfort. I stayed quiet. I smiled when Brianna said it was nice to have me around. I rinsed my mug after every use. Folded my blanket sharp. Never left the light on too long. And the days passed. Not in betrayal, but in soft removal. First, I wasn't asked what to make for dinner. Then I wasn't told when they had eaten. One afternoon, I came home from the corner store and found a treadmill where my boxes had been. Thought it'd motivate us, Daniel said. I nodded again. Because asking meant reminding them I still lived there. That night I opened my old recipe book. Found a photo tucked inside me and Harold in front of the lilac bush 1984. We were laughing. Both of us sunburnt. I looked happy in a way that felt foreign now. I touched the photo. Ran my thumb along the edge. The paper was soft. Almost like cloth. Sometimes the world doesn't tell you you're not welcome. It just stops making room for your chair. But even chairs can be pulled back out. Even doors can be opened from the other side. Daniel's guest room had no photographs. No wrinkles in the pillow. No noise in the floorboards. It was a room that had never learned to hold someone long. There was a clock. Modern. It didn't tick. It blinked silently like time was only supposed to pass without being felt. I kept my suitcase at the foot of the bed. Didn't unpack. They said it was temporary. But weeks have a way of folding into months when no one checks the calendar. I washed my own clothes. Kept them folded in a basket. Every Sunday I offered to cook. Every Sunday Brianna said they'd already eaten. So I started eating earlier. On a tray. In my room, the tray had a chip on the corner. Just enough to catch the edge of my sleeve if I wasn't careful. Once I made meatloaf. Harold's favorite. Brianna smiled politely. Took one bite. Said she was trying low carb now. Daniel didn't say much. He scraped the ketchup off. I wrapped the leftovers. Put them in a container no one ever touched again. One night, I stood in the hallway, listening to their laughter behind the closed kitchen door. My name wasn't mentioned. Neither was my dinner. I remembered a winter night years ago. Our old house. Snow tapping the windows. Harold wrapping a scarf around my shoulders as I stirred soup. You warm the whole house, he'd said. I don't think he meant the stove. The scarf was still in a box somewhere. Maybe in the attic. Maybe in someone's memory. One morning, I offered to water the plants. Brianna said, "Oh, no need. We have a schedule." So I sat instead. Watched the sun move across the carpet. Watched the plants lean toward the light without needing me. And I wondered if that's what I'd become. A window someone kept clean but never opened. A chair no one sat in but didn't throw away. A shadow that didn't make noise when it moved. The kind of quiet you only notice when it's finally gone. I started writing lists. Not for groceries. Not for errands. Just lists of things I remembered before they faded. How Harold folded his towel twice, never 3. The way our porch door sang a low creak when the wind changed. The sound of his boots coming in at 5:30. The little grunt he made bending down for firewood. I wrote them all in a notebook with a blue spine. I didn't want them to vanish just because no one else asked about them. Daniel came in one afternoon and saw me writing. He chuckled. Journaling, huh? That's good, Mom. Keeps the mind sharp. Then he left. Didn't ask what I was writing. Didn't sit down. Didn't look twice. That evening, I noticed the picture on the hallway shelf had changed. It used to be Daniel at graduation with me and Harold on either side. Now it was just him and Brianna in Cancun. Same frame. Different memory. No one said anything. I didn't ask. At dinner, I brought up the lilac bush behind our old house. How it always bloomed too early. How Harold once covered it with a tarp to protect it from frost. Daniel stirred his soup. Said nothing. Brianna smiled. That sounds sweet, Mom. But we don't really get frost here, remember? I nodded. Pressed my hands into my lap until the warmth left my fingers. After they went to bed, I stood in the kitchen and looked at the fridge. There were magnets. Reminders. Vacation snapshots. A calendar with Brianna's yoga class circled in pink ink. Nothing of mine. Not even the list I wrote for groceries last week. They hadn't used it. I found it in the trash. Still folded. Not torn. Not crumpled. Just discarded with care. That hurt more than if they had argued with me. Because when someone argues, they still see you. But when they stop answering, when they stop needing your input, that's when you begin to shrink into the wallpaper. I wasn't excluded. I was just overlooked in high resolution, and somehow, that made it harder to breathe. The guest towels changed. At first they were white. Soft. Thick. The kind they fold for company. One morning I found a beige one on the rack. Thinner. Labeled with my name in permanent marker on the corner tag. I hadn't written it. But someone had. I held it in my hands for a long time. As if the towel might speak the words no one else would. Later that week I overheard Brianna on the phone. She was laughing softly. Said something about adjusting nicely to having her here. Then, she said, "It's honestly easier than I expected." I didn't know if that meant me or something else. But I stayed quiet. Again. Sometimes, I wondered if I was becoming polite to the point of extinction. Daniel started locking the garage. He said it was for safety. Then moved the garden tools somewhere else. He had mentioned needing space for a treadmill. For him and Brianna. Not once did he ask if I needed anything stored. Not once did he ask when I planned to go home. One evening, I brought it up, lightly, over tea. "So has Patrice said anything about moving out yet?" Daniel looked up, blinking like I'd startled him. "Oh, I think she extended another month. Didn't I mention?" "Hey, hadn't." Brianna said, "She's happy there, such a cute space." Then they moved on to talk about paint samples. Soft blue for the bathroom. Or maybe sage. I sipped my tea. It had gone cold. My fingers tightened around the cup. Porcelain hummed faintly as I set it down. That night I opened the bottom drawer of the small desk in the guest room. Inside was a folder labeled, "Mortgage, Vermont." My name was on it. So was Harold's. But what caught my eye was the sticky note. Daniel's handwriting. It read, "Check status before Sept." No one had mentioned September. No one had told me there was a timeline. I held the paper until my hands hurt. That was the first time I asked myself if temporary had always meant until you stop asking. And if so, how long had I already been silent? It started with the chair. Mine. The one Harold sat in every Thursday evening, his crossword tucked under one elbow, the television remote under the other. It wasn't fancy. The seams had gone soft and the cushion slumped like an old pillow. But it was ours. I'd mended it 3 times. Once with blue thread, once with brown, and once with a patch from his old shirt. That morning, when I walked into the den, it was gone. In its place stood something new. Beige. Leather. Wide enough for 2 but empty all the same. I ran my hand over the arm. It felt like hospital vinyl. Brianna passed behind me, a dish towel over her shoulder. "Oh. We swapped it out," she said. "That old thing was breaking down." I nodded. Because asking would sound dramatic. And I'd been trying not to be dramatic. But that chair held more than a body. It held the shape of our life. Later, I opened the garage. There it was. My chair. Covered in a white sheet. Pushed beside tangled cords and a dusty box labeled Xmas. I lifted the corner of the sheet. The cushion sagged in the same spot. The thread still loose along one side. I sat for a moment. The air smelled like cardboard and motor oil. But the armrest remembered me. That evening, I didn't sit in the new chair. I stood by the window and watched their lights flicker on kitchen hallway upstairs. Not mine. I walked back to my room. The hallway shelf had changed. My ceramic bowl with lavender buds gone. So was the photo of me and Daniel at his college graduation. In their place, a scented candle and a print that read "Live Simply." The irony. That night I made dinner. Meatloaf. Mashed potatoes. Green beans. All from scratch. No one sat. They were running late, eating in front of the television, saying thank you as they passed behind me. I scraped my own plate. The sink was half full. As I dried the last fork, I remembered how Harold used to wait until I sat before taking his first bite. He always asked for seconds. Even when he wasn't hungry. Afterward, I wandered the hallway, like someone retracing steps in a museum where the exhibits had moved. I touched the frame where my photo used to hang. There was still a faint outline on the wall, dustless, bare, like even time had forgotten to cover me. That night, I turned off the kitchen light. The silence buzzed in my ear like an old radio left on in another room. I wrote in my notebook. I think I'm being erased, not all at once, but with polite hands. Hands that smile as they carry pieces of you out of the frame. It wasn't just the chair. It was the calendar too. The big one I used to hang on the kitchen wall with birthdays written in ink and holidays circled twice. Gone. In its place, a sleek magnetic whiteboard. Minimal. Blank. Only appointments in Brianna's handwriting. I searched the drawer where I kept the stickers, little gold stars for Daniel's chores, pink flowers for anniversaries. Not there. No one asked. No one said why. I began waking earlier. Before their alarms. Just to have the kitchen in silence. I'd boil water for tea. Use the same chipped mug Harold once bought from a roadside fair. The one that read Vermont Strong. One morning I opened the cabinet, and it wasn't there. Replaced by matching ceramic sets, gray and pale green. Brianna said she was organizing. Said mismatched mugs made things feel chaotic. I found my old mug in a box under the sink. Still stained from Earl Grey. Still holding my lip mark faint in the glaze. I rinsed it and put it on the windowsill beside the basil pot. A kind of rebellion. Small, silent. But mine. That week, Daniel got a new phone. Brianna changed their Wi-Fi password. I asked for it. She said, "Oh, I'll type it in for you. It's a bit long." She never did. So I stopped checking email. Stopped FaceTiming Nancy. Stopped reading the news. In the quiet, I remembered things. Like the drawer Harold built just for recipe cards. Like the sound of our porch screen slamming lightly in the wind. I went to look for my knitting bag. The one with lavender yarn. Hadn't touched it in weeks. It wasn't in the closet. Brianna said I thought that bag was trash. It was all tangled. I didn't reply. I found it in the garage half emptied, some needles missing. The scarf I had started was unwound at the edges. Loose. Sad. Like a memory that forgot how to hold itself together. I picked it up and sat on the low step beneath the shelves. The light from the hallway barely reached me. I tied a new knot. Held the thread steady. Tried again. That night Daniel asked if I was all right. I looked at him. Really looked. The boy who once cried when I left him at preschool. The boy who used to crawl into my lap and ask me to tell the story of the green boat again. Now he checked his smartwatch as I answered. I'm fine, I said. Because what else can you say when the things that made you are slowly no longer allowed to stay? When temporary starts to feel like a word no one believes but you. The guest towels changed. At first they were soft. White. Thick. The kind you'd fold for company. One morning I found a thinner beige one on the rack labeled with my name in marker on the corner tag. I hadn't written it. But someone had. Later that week, Daniel asked if I wanted to attend a neighborhood dinner. I lit up. Said yes. Brianna paused. Oh, it's more for the younger crowd. But we'll bring you something. They didn't. That night I made toast. Ate it standing by the sink. Listened to the hum of the dishwasher and the silence of my phone. I used to get calls. Friends checking in. Cousins asking for the sweet potato pie recipe. Now even the robocalls had quieted. I checked my voicemail. 3 missed calls from unknown numbers. No messages. I erased them one by one. Later that week, I overheard Brianna on the phone again. She said we're settling into a rhythm, it's just easier when we keep her on a schedule. Keep her. Like I was a calendar item. A shift rotation. A task. They started leaving without telling me. Quick trips to the store. Lunches with friends. Each time I came out of my room and found the house empty, I stood at the window watching their cars return without apology. Once I baked banana bread. Left it on the counter with a note that said, still warm. No one ate it. I found it the next day cut in half, dried at the edges. Crumbs scattered, but no plate, no thank you. I wrapped the rest in foil and put it in the freezer. Didn't say a word. I was starting to measure my place not by presents but by the items that remained untouched. My shoes tucked further under the bed. My coats never moved from the closet hook. My books unread, their spines facing the wall. Even the windowsill where I used to keep my tea mug was cleared. Replaced by a plant with a tag still on it. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and heard Brianna whisper, "She's still here." I wasn't meant to hear it. But I did. So I turned around and went back to the guest room. Closed the door and let the light fall across the old quilt. I didn't move for an hour. Just listened to the house hum, like it didn't need me. That evening, I heard Brianna speaking softly in the hallway. Maybe she's happier like this. Less responsibility. Daniel answered, I just hope she doesn't start making it difficult. Difficult. As if silence wasn't already a daily sacrifice. As if being invisible wasn't the hardest part of all. That night I opened my notebook again. I didn't write poetry. Didn't list memories. I made a question. What happens when you begin to vanish without anyone saying the words? How long before you vanish from yourself? I asked Daniel when I could go home. He looked away. Soon, Mom. Just, not yet. Soon had lost its meaning. So I asked again the next week. He said they were thinking about turning the cabin into an income property. Just for a little while, he said. To help with expenses. You don't even need the space now. I swallowed hard. What about my things? We'll keep them safe. Don't worry. I worried anyway. That night, I called Mr. Gaines, the lawyer Harold and I had trusted for almost 3 decades. His voice was slower now, but kind. I asked about the deed. Do I still own the house? I said. There was a pause. Paper shuffling. Typing. Then he said, You did. Until last year. I didn't understand. What do you mean? Your name was removed after a quitclaim transfer. Signed electronically. By Daniel. I never signed anything. He paused again. You might have granted him temporary power of attorney. I sat there on the edge of the guest bed, my hands shaking. I remembered the surgery. The recovery. The stack of forms Daniel told me were for insurance. Just signatures. Mom. It's routine. I had signed. Tired. Foggy. Trusting. And with that pen I had given away the place where Harold died. The place where I had planted our wedding tree. The place where my name was carved into the kitchen drawer with a butter knife in 1981. Gone. No warning. No conversation. Just removed. When Daniel came home that night I didn't ask. Because if I did I wasn't sure I could bear to hear him lie with his gentle voice. So I folded my hands, set them in my lap, and listened to the house hum like a stranger. I found out from the grocery clerk. She recognized me. Said, Oh, you must be Daniel's mom. The lady who used to live on Cedar Hill. Used to live. I smiled unsure. She added, My cousin rents that place now. Said it's beautiful. I stood there, a carton of eggs in my hand, my name still echoing in the air. I walked home. My legs aching. I asked Daniel that evening. You rented the house. He didn't deny it. Just temporarily. You weren't using it. And we needed the extra income. I could have gone back, I said. He looked surprised. But the stairs, Mom. You said they tired you out. So they had rented my home because I got winded on the steps. No mention of my garden. My sewing nook. My rocker by the window. He told me the tenants were nice. A young couple. They had a dog. Don't worry, he added. They're respectful. Respectful. To a house I couldn't even enter. I asked if they had my things. He waved me off. Some of it's boxed. Some we donated. Donated. He shrugged. Most of it was old, Mom. Outdated. You've got what you need here. What I needed. I stared at the floor. The quilt Harold's mother had made us gone. The photo albums. The recipe box. The small wooden spoon with the crack down the middle. History cleaned up for modern living. I lay awake that night. Long after the house went still. I pictured strangers walking across my floors with shoes on. Using my tea kettle. Turning the pages of books I had read to Daniel when he had chickenpox. And somehow I missed the creak of the back porch steps more than I missed any of them. Mr. Gaines called again. He said, I'm sorry. The house is now in Daniel's name entirely. The documents were legally binding. I asked about recourse. He paused. Unless there was fraud, or you can prove mental duress. I thanked him. Not because I accepted it. But because my throat had stopped cooperating. Later I sat with the tax statement Daniel had left on the counter. It listed the property under Holloway Family Trust. He had built a shell around it. Protected from me. While smiling across the dinner table. I checked online. Typed the address into a listing site. There it was. Leased. Furnished. Marketed as charming rustic retreat with generational charm. They had photographed my curtains. My porch swing. The willow tree I had watered through 5 droughts. Daniel walked past me. Didn't notice the screen. I asked quietly. What happens when they move out? He hesitated. We might keep renting. Or maybe sell. It depends. He said it with such ease. Sell. The word floated like smoke in a locked room. I nodded. Because screaming wasn't allowed here. That night I wrote something different in my notebook. Not a poem. Not a quote. Just one word. Enough. Not loud. Not final. But firm. Like the door I would soon learn to close without anyone's permission. I don't know when I stopped speaking first. Maybe it was the Tuesday Daniel didn't look up from his phone when I walked into the kitchen. Or the Thursday Brianna passed me in the hallway and didn't say good morning. I waited. Waited for someone to notice the silence. No one did. I became a fixture like the lamp in the guest room, always plugged in, never turned on. That week I tried to find the envelope with Harold's letters. I had kept them tied in blue ribbon stored in the cedar chest at the foot of my old bed. The bed now belonged to someone with a golden retriever and a collection of scented candles. When I asked Daniel, he said, oh, some of those boxes were moldy. We had to toss a few. I didn't ask which few. I didn't want to hear my husband's handwriting described as clutter. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. They looked older than I remembered. Brown spots where wedding rings used to rest. Fingers that once braided hair and tied shoes and buttoned tiny shirts now stiff and still. Brianna walked in later with clean sheets. I offered to help. She smiled. It's easier if I do it. That's what they always said. It's easier. Simpler. Faster. My presence had become a speed bump on their route to comfort. So, I stepped aside. Again. The next morning, I heard laughter from the backyard. I peeked through the blinds. Daniel was building a fire pit. Stacking stones. Smiling. Brianna handed him lemonade. They clinked glasses. I used to bring him lemonade. With crushed ice and a straw bent just right so he wouldn't spill it on his science books. I turned from the window. Went back to the guest room. My room. The room with no photos. No drawers of my own. No sign that I had ever mattered here. I opened the closet and found my winter coat stuffed behind gift wrap. It still smelled like lavender. Still had a tissue in the pocket from the last time I wore it to Harold's grave. I sat on the floor. Pressed the sleeve to my face. Breathed in as if the fabric could remind me of who I was. But all I smelled was the faint perfume of forgetting. I wanted to cry. But even that felt like too much noise. So I folded the coat back. Tucked it deeper. And closed the door on the last thing that had ever held me. Then I looked around the room. The beige carpet. The generic art print above the bed. A vase on the dresser with plastic tulips. Everything neutral. Everything replaceable. Except me. And even that was starting to feel like an assumption. Once Harold used to say I made the porch bigger so you'd always have room to sit. He meant it literally. But it was also a promise. Here no one built space for me, only convenience, only quiet, only less. The day the silence cracked was a Tuesday. I had made soup. Carrot ginger. A recipe from Harold's mother. I stirred it slowly, watching the swirl of orange fold into steam. Daniel came home early. Dropped his briefcase by the door. Didn't notice the smell. Brianna followed. Is that soup? She asked. I smiled. Yes. Enough for everyone. She opened the fridge. Pulled out leftovers. Microwaved them in silence. Daniel sat in the living room. He was laughing at something on his phone. No one asked for a bowl. So I ladled a serving into my own dish. Saturday, at the small table near the window. The spoon clinked gently. The soup was still hot. I took slow bites. Let the warmth press against my chest. It tasted like memory. Like patience. Like something once known. I looked around the room. Brianna's succulents lined the sill. Daniel's shoes by the door. Their books stacked neatly on the shelf I used to keep photographs. My things were nowhere. Even the tea towel I'd embroidered gone, replaced by a printed one that said, "Bless this mess." I stood, poured the rest of the soup into a jar, labeled it, put it in the back of the fridge. Then I walked to the den. Daniel looked up, paused his video. "Hey," he said, his voice casual, not cruel, just distant. I sat across from him. He didn't ask why. "I need to know," I said. "If you plan to sell the house." He blinked, then nodded slowly. "We're thinking about it. The market's strong. It doesn't make sense to let it sit." Let it sit. He meant the house that held my wedding, my son's first Christmas, the piano I taught him to play on. I nodded. "Okay," I said. My voice didn't shake, because something inside me had already broken and settled. Later that night I stood in the backyard. The wind carried wood smoke. The stars blinked above like old friends who didn't know what to say. I closed my eyes. In that moment I felt Harold's hand in the way the grass pressed against my feet. I heard his voice in the rustle of the maple leaves. I thought of our porch. How he had stained every board twice over so it would last longer than we did. And now they would sell it. Not out of spite. Not even out of malice. Just convenience. That was what hurt most. Not being hated. Just being in the way. I went back inside. They were watching a show with the volume too loud. The light from the screen flickered across their faces. They didn't look up. I passed through the room like a ghost who still remembered how the furniture used to be. That night I didn't write in my notebook. I sat with it open, the page white, waiting. And for the first time I didn't know what to say. It started with a drawer. The one in the laundry room bottom right where I once kept clothespins and Harold's old garden gloves. I opened it one morning looking for a safety pin. Instead, I found a paper bag with my name on it. Inside a folded scarf. Lavender yarn. Unfinished. My stitches. The same ones Brianna had said were tangled. Unusable. I stood there bag in hand, my fingers trembling. They hadn't thrown it out. Not all of it. Something survived. I sat on the bench by the back door. Unfolded the scarf. The end was frayed, yes, but the middle held. My rhythm. My color. My care. It had waited. That afternoon I walked to the backyard alone. The wind had shifted. A little warmer. Birdsong overhead. I passed the fire pit. Still blackened from last week. I didn't mind. I went further to the fence line where Harold once hung wind chimes from an old maple. The tree was still there. Thicker now. Its bark split in long rough lines. I placed my hand on it. The cold met my palm. I whispered. "They're thinking of selling." The tree didn't answer. But it held the wind just right, a slow creak almost like a breath. I stood there longer than I meant to. When I turned to go I noticed the rosemary bush near the edge of the path. It had grown wild. Untrimmed. But beneath the overgrowth I saw something. A stake. Weathered. Leaning. And tied to it the faded plastic tag I had written in 1998. Agnes Kitchen Cuttings. I knelt beside it. Touched the soil. Still soft. Still dark. I pulled a sprig. Crushed it gently. The smell rose up earthy, sharp like autumn bread and Sunday roast. Something opened in me. Not loud. Not defiant. Just a hinge that hadn't moved in years. I went inside, found my old apron at the back of the linen drawer. Put it on. Tied it twice. The fabric felt thin, but familiar. The strings still held. I chopped onions without tears. Kneaded dough with steadier hands. The flour clung to my skin. The counter creaked under my palms. My back ached, but it was the ache of doing something that was once mine. And when the rosemary hit the heat, the house smelled like memory. Like presents. I sat by the oven while the dough rose. Steam fogged the glass above the stovetop. Sunlight touched the floor where I used to rock Daniel to sleep. I stayed in the kitchen. Not to serve. To reclaim. Because some things they hadn't removed. Some things still remembered my name. The next morning I woke before the house did. The sky was still gray edges of dawn, just beginning to stretch across the kitchen tiles. I put the kettle on. Chose the chipped cup. The one with the faded blue hydrangeas. My favorite. It had been in the back corner of the highest cabinet. I had to climb a step stool to reach it. But it was there. That mattered. I sat by the window with a slice of my own bread. Still warm. Still mine. Birds chirped softly as if they knew someone was listening again. When Brianna came down, she paused. The smell of fresh baking still hung in the air. "You were up early," she said. I nodded. "Made bread." She smiled thinly. "Polite. That's nice." Then she reached for her protein shake. Vanilla. Chalky. I didn't offer her a slice. Not to be cruel. But because it was okay to keep something for myself. Later that day, I found my old box of seeds. Tucked away in the garage behind Daniel's gym equipment and a plastic Christmas tree. It smelled of soil and thyme. Inside, Basil chives marigolds. All handwritten. All mine. I carried it back to the backyard. The rosemary bush waited stronger in the light. I dug near it. Turned the dirt. Worked slowly as my knees complained and my breath came shallow. But I kept going. One row. Then another. Me palms blistered. Me back stiffena. But the motion. The ritual. It was familiar. I hummed an old hymn. One Harold loved. And somewhere between the first sprout and the last handful of earth I forgot to feel small. When Daniel came home, he saw the trowel in my hand. "You've been out here." He sounded surprised. I nodded. "Just tidying up." He hesitated. Looked at the dirt on my apron. The sweat on my brow. "You didn't have to do that." I smiled gently. "I know." He started to say something else then stopped. Just stood there watching me as if I'd shifted somehow into someone unfamiliar. Not fragile. Not fading. Just present. He opened the back door wider and stepped aside without a word. I walked past him, the rosemary still in my hand. That night I left the dishes in the sink. Lit a candle by the stove. The scent of rosemary drifted in. The stars blinked above. And for the first time in months I dreamt in color. And woke without apology. The next morning, sunlight touched the windowsill, where I had placed a new jar of seeds ready to plant. It was a Sunday when I found the piano, covered in a gray tarp behind old baby gear and holiday bins in Daniel's garage. I hadn't seen it since the move. My hands trembled as I pulled the tarp back. The wood was scratched. The keys slightly yellowed. But it was still mine. Still ours. Harold had saved for that piano. 2 years of late shifts so I could teach Daniel on real ivory. I ran my fingers across the keys. Some stuck. Others echoed faintly. But they sang. Not perfectly. Not proudly. But softly. Like something that had waited. I opened the lid. Inside a folded piece of paper. My handwriting. A list of Daniel's practice songs. Each one dated. Twinkle. Bach. Ode to Joy. The ink had smudged with time, but the notes they stayed. Tucked in the corner under the felt, a photo had slipped down. Me and Daniel. He must have been 10. Sitting on my lap, both of us grinning. His fingers on the white keys. Mine above, guiding. I touched the photo gently. It smelled faintly of dust and cedar. A memory quietly intact. I carried the paper and photo inside. Flattened them on the kitchen table. Stared at them until the light changed. Then I walked to the den. To Daniel. He was reading. Feet up. Relaxed. Do you remember this? I asked. He looked. Paused. A flicker in his face. Wow. I haven't seen that in years. I nodded. I think I'd like it back. He raised a brow. The list. The piano. He shifted in his seat. Mom, it's not really usable anymore. I kept my voice even. I'd still like it. He opened his mouth. Closed it again. Okay, he said at last. The next morning I watched as he cleared space in the side room. Not the guest room. Not the garage. A corner near the window. Facing east. He didn't speak much. But his hands moved carefully. Like he understood he was returning something that had never truly left. I helped polish the bench. Dusted the lid. Lit a candle nearby. And then I played. Just a few notes. Rough. Hesitant. But true. And for the first time since Harold passed, I felt the room hold me. Not out of duty. Not out of habit. But as if I belonged there. That afternoon I placed the old practice list back inside the lid. Not to keep. To remind. Some roots don't vanish. They just wait for the right hands to touch them again. It began with a letter I never thought I'd send. I waited until the house was empty. Daniel had taken Brianna to a brunch downtown. I watched them from the window, her laughing, his hand on the steering wheel. Once the car disappeared, I moved quickly. I pulled the folder from under the mattress. The one Harold and I had labeled just in case. Inside, deed copies. Bank forms. A legal contact from years ago, still legible, still valid. I sat at the kitchen table. Sunlight caught on the rim of my coffee cup. I hadn't touched it. The steam had faded. But the resolve had not. I dialed the number. It rang twice. Then a familiar voice. Agnes Holloway, he said, like no time had passed. Is this about the house? I nodded, then remembered he couldn't see. Yes, I said. My name's still on it, isn't it? He chuckled. Your name is first, Agnes. Always was. I exhaled slowly. Then I want to explore. Options. He paused. I'm listening. We spoke for 11 minutes. I wrote everything down. In neat lines, with little stars beside the parts that gave me hope. After I hung up, I sat very still. The wind moved the curtains slightly. The air smelled like the rosemary I had left in a dish by the sink. I looked around the kitchen. Every drawer. Every wall. Every floorboard. Not mine. Not anymore. But that could change. Not through a fight. Not through shouting. Through paper. Through quiet signatures. Through presence. I packed the documents in a manila envelope. Labeled it simply personal. Then I placed it inside my coat. The one that still smelled of lavender and rain. Before Daniel came home, I had returned everything to place. The folder. The phone. The envelope. But I kept the pen. Held it in my hand as I stirred the evening soup. Because something in me knew I had started writing my own ending. That night I sat by the window and wrote my name on a blank envelope. Not as a mother. Not as a guest. Just a woman who remembered what she still owned. And intended to take it back. It was a small post office. Brick walls. One faded flag out front. I waited until Wednesday morning when the neighborhood emptied for work and the light was soft. I wore my coat. Carried the envelope flat in my bag. No creases. Inside the air smelled of dust and ink. And something else, something still. The clerk was young. Hair in a tight braid. Nails chipped but kind eyes. "Need a stamp?" she asked. I nodded, then opened the envelope. Slid the forms inside. I had checked them 3 times. "Certified mail," I said. "Tracking and confirmation." She weighed it gently. As if the contents might break. "It'll go today," she said. "Want a receipt?" "Yes," I said. My fingers brushed hers as she handed it to me. I tucked it into my purse like a quiet promise. Outside the wind had shifted again. Cooler. But clearer. I didn't go home right away. I walked. Past the diner Harold and I used to visit. Past the library where I once ran Story Hour. Past the house with blue shutters that used to belong to Mrs. Langley. So many places where I had once been known. So many names that had faded. But mine, I was learning, didn't have to. Back home I made tea. Earl Grey. With a slice of lemon. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled out one last sheet of paper. Not légal. Not formal. Just my handwriting. Blue ink. Unrushed. I wrote. "To whom it may concern, this home is not forgotten. It holds memory. It holds care. It holds name." I didn't sign it. Didn't need to. The letter was tucked beneath the forms. Something softer beneath the structure. I sealed the envelope with a slow press of my palm. Like blessing it. That afternoon, I passed Daniel in the hallway. He looked up from his phone. "You're out early," he said. I smiled. "Just errands." He nodded, distracted. Didn't ask more. That night I pulled the curtains back and looked out over the garden. The rosemary caught the moonlight. The soil held its shape. I whispered Harold's name once. Just to see if the air still carried it. It did. And when I turned off the lights, I felt something settle. Not peace. Not yet. But momentum. And that was enough. 3 days later the letter arrived. I knew before Daniel told me. He stood in the doorway holding a white envelope with government print. "What is this?" he asked. I dried my hands. Took it gently. Didn't flinch. "It's mine," I said. "Addressed to me." He hesitated. Then stepped back. I opened it at the kitchen table. Carefully. Neatly. Unsigned confirmation. Instruction. On appointment date. Just a simple office, half an hour from here. But the paper held weight. Legal weight. I folded it again. Slid it into my apron. Daniel Lingel. "Are you doing something with the house?" I looked at him. He had my father's eyebrows. But none of Harold's stillness. "I'm clarifying things," I said. "For myself." He didn't argue. Didn't apologize either. But for once he didn't look away. That weekend, I took the piano bench outside. Set it under the maple tree. The afternoon light slanted gently. I sanded the legs. Polished the joints. It wasn't just furniture. It was intention. Brianna came out once. Watched me from the porch. "You've been busy lately." I nodded. "It helps." She said nothing. But didn't walk away either. On Monday, I took the bus to the courthouse. The ride was quiet. Fields passed in golden silence. At the clerk's window, a woman in glasses looked up. She asked for ID. Signature. I handed over both. She tapped a few keys. Then nodded. Your name is still on record, she said. I nodded. I'd like it to stay that way. And be recognized. She slid a new form across the desk. Simple. Straightforward. I signed. No fanfare. No fuss. Just ink. And agency. On the way home, I bought a bundle of daisies and a tin of wood wax. That evening, I opened Harold's journal again. Inside notes about the house. Measurements. Hopes. And a sentence scrawled near the back. This place only breathes because she does. I ran my hand over the words. A quiet affirmation from a man who rarely praised. I closed the journal. Held it to my chest. Then placed it on top of the sealed documents. The candle flickered beside it. And I whispered. Still breathing, Harold. Still here. It happened over breakfast. Daniel shuffled in later than usual. Hair mussed. Phone in hand. Brianna was already gone early yoga class, I think. I poured my tea. Didn't offer him any. He grabbed a banana, muttered something about emails. Then paused. There it was. On the kitchen counter. A letter. Addressed to both of us. I had placed it there. Neatly. Intentionally. He picked it up. The county office. I nodded. He tore the seal. Eyes scanning quickly, then slowing. He read the name. My name listed clearly as the sole owner. The new registration. The legal update. The confirmation that the house was no longer in limbo. I watched his fingers stiffen. His jaw shift. You changed the deed. No, I said. I restored it. He looked up. Confused. Angry. But we agreed. You decided. I interrupted, voice steady. I accepted. For a while. He set the letter down. This complicates things. I folded my napkin slowly. No, Daniel. This clarifies things. He ran a hand through his hair. Looked around the room as if it had betrayed him. I thought we had an understanding. I stood. We do now. Silence filled the room. Not heavy. Just honest. He tried again. So what happens now? I poured more tea. Let the steam rise between us. You live here. And so do I. But we don't pretend anymore that I'm just passing through. He looked at me. Really looked. And for a moment the boy I raised surfaced. Not defensive. Not untitled. Just startled to meet someone he hadn't truly seen. Me? Why didn't you say anything sooner? I rested my hands on the table. Old hands. Steady hands. Because I was waiting to feel like I had the right. And now, I know I do. He stood slowly. Took his phone, his banana. Left the letter where I'd placed it. Didn't slam a door. Didn't yell. Just walked out quietly. I listened to his footsteps fade. Then I reached for the letter. Folded it neatly. Tucked it into the cedar drawer where Harold's journal lived. One piece of paper. But it carried every inch of me. For the first time in months I didn't just feel like I was in my house. I felt like I was home. It started with small shifts. The next morning Daniel didn't eat at the counter. He sat across from me. No words. Just toast. And the soft scrape of knife on butter. He looked tired. But quieter. Less armor. More skin. He reached for the honey, the one I liked. Didn't ask. Just used it. Then passed it my way. A tiny gesture. But I noticed. Later that week, a knock came at the door. A man in overalls, clipboard in hand. "Roof inspection," he said. "Scheduled under Holloway." I raised an eyebrow. Daniel appeared behind me. "I thought it was time," he said. "Been meaning to." I didn't smile. But I stepped aside. When the man climbed up, I brewed 2 cups of tea. I handed one to Daniel on the back porch. He accepted it. Held it with both hands. Didn't check his phone. We sat in silence. "Then I read the letter again," he said. "Twice." I waited. "I guess I never thought you'd want to stay." I stared ahead. "Wanting has nothing to do with it. This is home." He nodded slowly. "I see that now." We didn't hug. Didn't cry. Just sipped. The roof creaked above. A seagull passed overhead, its shadow sliding across the old swing set. That afternoon, I found a note tucked near the piano. It was short. Just 5 words. I cleared the guest room. No signature. Just that. I stood in the hallway for a long time. Breathing it in. A small sentence. But to me it echoed louder than any apology. I walked down the hall, my hand brushing the wallpaper. Tiny faded roses. I had picked that pattern in the summer of '82. The door was ajar. Inside, sunlight spilled across the wooden floor. Bare now. No gym bags. No office chair. Just space. I stepped in. Pressed my hand to the wall where Harold once hung the quilt rack. I could almost feel the texture of cotton against my palm. I turned slowly. Every corner breathed again. Not like before. Not yet. But close. I didn't speak. Didn't declare victory. I just stood there. One woman. One room. And the sound of quiet returning. The next few days the house shifted. Not loudly. Not all at once. But like breath returning to old lungs. Daniel started knocking. Once before entering the kitchen. Once before opening the mail. Brianna brought flowers. Daisies. Left them without a note on the table where I sewed. I didn't ask why. They knew. One evening, Daniel approached me with 2 mugs of tea. He offered one, then sat across from me. "There's something else," he said. I looked at the financials. I saw the rent money from the house. I nodded. He hesitated. "It was a lot." "It was," I said. He sipped. "I think you should have it back." It tilted my head. "I already do." He blinked. "I mean, officially." "No," I said softly. "I meant emotionally." He didn't speak. "I let you manage it because I thought that was love. Turns out it was erasure." I looked down. "I'm sorry." The words hung there. Not perfect. But real. I placed my mug down. "I'm not here to punish you, Daniel. But I won't erase myself to comfort you anymore." He nodded slowly. "I know." The next morning I brought down the cedar chest. Opened it in front of him. Inside, photos. Receipts. The original deed. He looked through them as if touching history he'd forgotten. When he handed me back the papers, his hands were steady. Later that night, he knocked again. "Would it be okay if I moved the boxes from your room to the garage?" I nodded. He paused. "I could repaint it too. If you want." I smiled, tired but whole. "We'll see." That weekend we cleaned the room together. Daniel vacuumed the corners. I wiped the window glass with vinegar and cloth. The same way my mother used to. I placed Harold's photo on the nightstand. Then unfolded the quilt we had stitched the year Daniel was born. Each square a season. Each color a story. I smoothed it gently over the mattress. It was quiet. But not lonely. Justice hadn't come to scold or reclaim. It had come to remind that I was still here. And I had never truly left. It wasn't dramatic. There was no party. No big announcement. No sudden change in the weather. Just a quiet Tuesday, and the sound of drawers opening again. Mine. I folded the tea towels with more care that morning. The blue ones Harold liked. Daniel didn't say much anymore, but what he did say was slower. Softer. Sometimes he'd pause in the hallway, just to ask if I needed anything. And sometimes I said yes. Because healing I was learning wasn't about pretending I'd never been hurt. It was about letting people show up again differently. The house felt warmer. Or maybe I did. Brianna brought over a lemon cake one Saturday. Said nothing. Just left it in the fridge with a note. For the woman who still makes this place feel like home. I sat at the piano that night and played something without thinking. Just fingers. And breath. No one clapped. No one watched. And yet it filled the room like music meant to return. That week I began writing again. Nothing grand. Just a notebook and some quiet mornings on the back porch. I wrote about the curtains. The way the sun hit the floor at 3:12 p.m. The time Harold dropped a whole bowl of stew and laughed until he cried. I wasn't writing for a book. Or for memory. I was writing because something inside me needed to be named before it was lost. On Wednesday, I got a card in the mail. From the county clerk's office. Just a routine confirmation. Nothing urgent. But it had my name on it. Spelled right. No hyphen. No shortening. Just me. Agnes Holloway. And I sat with that longer than I expected. I took the card, pressed it into the journal. Let the page curl around it like it belonged. Because it did. That evening, I made soup. Turned on the radio. An old Ella Fitzgerald song came on. The one Harold danced with socks on the kitchen floor. I didn't cry. Didn't turn it off. I just stirred slowly and let the music fill the quiet spaces I'd been reclaiming bit by bit. Daniel passed behind me once. Touched my shoulder lightly. Didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Some things when mended carefully don't break the same way again. The next morning I opened the cedar closet. Took out a red scarf Harold gave me on our 33rd Christmas. The scent was faint. Lavender maybe. Or memory. Daniel walked by. I remember that scarf, he said. You used to pull on it when you were little, I smiled. He laughed. A real one. Quiet. But there. I wore it that day. Wore it and wrote in the room that was mine again. No one knocked. No one asked permission. And for the first time in a long time I wrote my full name on the top corner of the page with no hesitation. Autumn came slowly that year. The leaves didn't rush. They turned in their own time. Amber. Rust. Auburn like old velvet. I sat on the porch with a quilt over my knees watching the wind rearrange the world. A few neighborhood children passed by on bicycles. One waved. I waved back. That afternoon, Daniel brought down an old photo album. Thought you might want this, he said. It was the blue one. Frayed at the corners. Smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I opened it slowly. Inside wedding photos. Christmas mornings. Daniel's first steps. Harold's quiet smile beside a snowman with a crooked carrot nose. One photo had me in the kitchen half-turned holding a spoon. Laughter frozen in time. He sat beside me. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. I forgot how much we used to be, I said quietly. Daniel nodded. We weren't always good at showing it. But we felt it. At least I did. I closed the book. Rested my hand on the cover. Some stories didn't need editing. Just remembering. That night I wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the house. To say thank you. For holding so much even when I couldn't. For carrying the weight when I had to be still. I tucked the letter into the drawer beside Harold's journal. One day, someone would find it. Or not. But I would know it was there. A few weeks later, I hosted something small. Just tea. And shortbread. For 3 women from the church group. Widows mostly quiet, some still tender from life. We didn't talk much. But we sat in the room that once held boxes and silence. And it held us too. On their way out, one of them touched my arm. It smells like peace in here, she said. I smiled. It's been learning. After they left, I walked through the house room by room. Touched the doorknobs. Ran my fingers along the windowsill. Straightened a picture frame. When I reached the cedar chest, I opened it one more time. Not for anything. Just to feel how full it had become with story. The late sunlight touches the wood grain of the old table, and for a moment, everything feels soft again. I've learned that legacy isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a name remembered in silence. And a pie shared with grace. What quiet legacy do you hope to leave behind? We'd love to read your story in the comments below. You are not alone. Your journey matters. Subscribe to Grandma Radio, where every story is a second chance.